Sunday, August 11th. I didn't tell Midge about the bowl today. In fact, I don't think I ever will tell her. The whole business about the pot was an accident, but she thinks I knew what I was doing all the time. Since she doesn't give me as much credit as I deserve for some things, this will even things up. After all, my idea of hunting for truffles was a lot better than hunting for old pots. The only difference was that it didn't work. Any scientist has a lot of different ideas, and he doesn't expect all of them to work, but Midge doesn't seem to understand that. Aunt Mabel usually has her big Sunday dinner about 2:30 in the afternoon. After church this morning, I changed clothes and went down to the lot with Agony. I walked back in the woods and took a look at Mr. Apple's fence. He has it completely finished now, and there it stands in the middle of his big lawn with absolutely nothing in it. If he had put it off in one corner and put a little house in it, I might have thought it was for a dog or with a bigger house for chickens, but this has nothing in it at all. The fence is high enough to be used as a pheasant run, but I can't imagine Mr. Apple raising pheasants. At the beginning, I poo-pooed Midge's idea about Mr. Apple, but I have to admit that there is something mysterious going on there. While I stood looking through the hedge, he appeared, dragging the hose. He turned on the water and started sprinkling the ground inside the fence. That just doesn't make sense. You can't even see that big part of the lot from his house, since there's a tall hedge that goes across, dividing the front and the back of the lot into two separate parts. I watched him for quite a while, and he went all around the fenced-in area, sprinkling the ground through the holes in the fence. Finally, I gave up and started back through the woods. When I arrived at the barn, there was a car parked beside the road, and a man was talking to Midge. He was an odd little man, wearing brown khaki trousers and a green sport shirt with big red flowers all over it. His face was sort of red and sunburned, and he was bareheaded. The thing I noticed especially was that there seemed to be more hair growing from the tips of his ears than from his head. There were little white tufts of hair in his ears, and then strands growing from the edges. He said his name was Zinzer. "I stopped to ask about your pigeons," he said. "But now that I'm here, I'm much more interested in that bowl there in the window. Where did you find it?" He talked in an odd sort of breathless way, and his words half tumbled over one another. "Over toward Bedden's Brook," I told him. It was easy to see that he was quite excited about the bowl, and so I didn't admit that I thought it was worthless. It looked kind of interesting, so I brought it home. "You are quite right," said the man, nodding his head up and down. "It's exceedingly interesting. Did you notice the decoration on it?" "You mean the zigzag lines around the edge?" "That's right," he said. "They're almost like a signature. Unless I'm mistaken, that bowl was made by one of the first potteries in New Jersey. At least one of the first ones in this area. I've been trying to locate the site of that pottery for 10 years. I know from my research that a man named Flanders had a pottery around here, and that he made ware and sold pottery both to the Indians and to early settlers." "How old is that bowl?" I asked. "I imagine at least 250 years old. It's not that bowl is especially valuable, except as a museum piece to illustrate New Jersey's early industries. I happen to be writing a history of New Jersey's colonial pottery, so I'm particularly interested. Would you care to sell it?" "Sure," I said. I was going to, I stopped just in time. A few words more and I would have left the cat out of the bag. Midge was standing by, and I could tell that she was quite impressed because she was quiet. I sort of grinned inside myself and tried to look wise. Midge is always saying that I haven't any sense of humor. For a few minutes I was tempted to tell her that the whole business of being so careful with the pot was all a joke so that she could see how wrong she was. "I'll give you $10 for it," the man said. "I think that's quite a fair price, but if you prefer, you can check with the State Museum in Trenton or the museum in Newark, because I don't want you to think that I'm trying to stampede you into selling something that is very valuable." $10 sounds a lot more than it's worth to me," I said. "As part of the bargain, I'd like you to show me where you found it," the man said. I agreed to do that, and he handed me $10. I turned around and handed it to Midge as though money didn't mean a thing to me. "Put this in the treasury, will you, Midge?" I said. "Guess we made out pretty well hunting for truffles after all." "Truffles?" the man said. "Have you been hunting for truffles?" I've been wanting to train my dog to be a truffle hound, I said. We're out hunting truffles when I found that bowl.
I've hunted for truffles myself, said Mr. Zinser.
I stuck my nose in the air and looked at Midge triumphantly. You see, there are truffles in America.
A few belonging to the truffle family have been found, he said, but none of the delicious kind that are found in France and Italy. The Indians here in New Jersey used to hunt a sort of truffle-like growth they called tuckahoe, which means a round loaf or cake. I found a few of those. They're usually attached to the roots of trees in low marshy places about 2 feet below ground. Some of them get as big as my head. They are white and very nutritious, but not very flavorful. However, I think searching for real truffle around here is rather hopeless.
Midge stuck her nose in the air and acted as though she had scored a point somehow. I never said that I was certain there were truffles. If a grown man like Mr. Zinser, who apparently knew what he was talking about, thought that there was a possibility of finding truffles, I don't see why it was dumb of me to think so. Anyhow, regardless of what Midge thought, it was a relief to know that the reason I hadn't found truffles was not because Agony wasn't smart enough to find them. It turned out that Uncle Al knew Mr. Zinser, so he, Midge, and I got into Mr. Zinser's car with him, and we drove over to where I found the bowl. Mr. Zinser looked at the woodchuck hole and then poked around in the weeds, getting more interested all the time. After he pointed it out, I could see that there were the remains of an old foundation there. He got a shovel out of his car and dug around and found 3 or 4 pieces from pots or jugs and 2 or 3 bricks. He was more excited every minute.
I think without a doubt this is the site of Flanders pottery, he said. This is most interesting, and I'm most indebted to you, young man. I plan to write an article for the Historical Society, and I'll give you full credit for finding the site.
I told him that if he was going to mention me, it was only fair to mention Agony, since Agony was actually the one who found the bowl.
You're quite right, said Mr. Zinser. As a matter of fact, I'll say that you were searching for truffles and that your dog Agony is the only truffle hound in America.
He took us back home, since it was almost dinner time, and then drove off to ask the farmer who owns the land if it would be alright to do some digging. I guess he plans to spend most of the next week digging over there. I hope he finds lots of pots.